Everyone, and welcome to Nature Connects, TNC's webinar series that connects you with scientists, experts, and influencers, and our partners from the US and around the world. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Judy Dunscombe, Senior Conservation Scientist for the Nature Conservancy in Virginia, and I'm going to be your host today. Here at the Nature Conservancy, we're dedicated to creating a healthier world for all. We tackle long-lasting solutions to the world's most complex environmental challenges. And we do that globally and locally because we know that our work for people and nature on the ground leads to a better future for the planet. We have an exciting program for you today. We'll be learning about an innovative venture underway between the Nature Conservancy and solar companies to pursue the development of utility-scale solar projects on former mine lands within the 250,000 acre Cumberland Forest project of Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee. By collaborating with Sun Tribe Solar and Dominion Energy at this former mine site, TNC is contributing to the growth of a clean energy economy and creating benefits for local communities while avoiding impacts to forests and farmland. Before we dive into today's program, I would love to share a little bit with you about our speaker, Brad Kreps. Brad joined the Nature Conservancy in 2001 and leads the Clinch Valley Program in Southwest Virginia and Northeastern Tennessee, a community-based conservation program that has helped conserve natural habitat in one of North America's most critical hotspots for biodiversity. Collectively, our folks in the Clinch work to protect the region's globally significant concentration of freshwater mussels through traditional land protection, as well as partnerships with local farmers in support of sustainable land management and communities seeking a sustainable post-coal economy. This program also manages the Cumberland Forest property, which is a mix of forests and former mine lands, and among other things, one of the few places in the eastern US that supports a wild elk herd. We have time for questions in the end, but as you think of things you want to ask Brad, please go ahead and enter those questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You'll also see information from us pop up in the chat box, but don't put your questions there, put them in the Q&A. Thanks again so much for joining us today. Brad, are you ready to tell us all about solar and Cumberland Forest?
Well, I am. Glad to be here today. So welcome everyone. Really appreciate everyone's interest in this topic. As Judy mentioned, I'm with the Clinch Valley Program based in far Southwest Virginia near the Virginia-Tennessee border. And I'm really excited to talk to you today about our Cumberland Forest project broadly, and then specifically about our work to try to repurpose and redevelop some former surface coal mining sites for new solar energy projects. Before I get started, we are going to show a video. We were really excited to have some great media coverage of this project in the Washington Post. So I want you to enjoy this video, and then I'll take my talk from there.
The energy transition from coal to renewables is inevitable.
I think there has been a little bit of an ideological shift in the mindset as it relates to green energy.
Reuse of mine lands and repurposing mine lands for renewable energy just makes a lot of sense.
We need immediate, drastic, annual emission cuts, unlike anything the world has ever seen.
We're trying to protect your water. You're trying to protect these banks.
Climate change is very real and very tangible, and over the last 10 years has been felt very acutely in a lot of communities.
There's a mix of strategies we need to undertake to address the threats of climate change, and certainly expanding renewables is one important strategy that we are working on. So a couple years ago, the Nature Conservancy completed one of our largest acquisitions ever in the U.S., and we call that Cumberland Forest. We acquired 250,000 acres of land in the Central Appalachians to demonstrate that we could manage these large properties for both nature and people benefits. manage and conserve the extensive forests that are on this property that serve a really important link to the larger wildlife corridors that we see across the entire Appalachian mountain range. And then with our solar work, we can repurpose some of these former surface mine sites that are non-forested into clean energy projects that can bring new benefits to the region as well.
We are at the Elizabeth Mine Superfund site. It is an abandoned mine site. It was a site that had operated for well over a century, from the early 1820s up until 1958 when it closed. We work with the communities to see if there's a vision for how the site might be repurposed at the end. So as part of doing that, we became aware of the potential for solar development. We were able to design that cover system to achieve our objectives, protect the streams, but also leave a cover system that is compatible with solar, and it's producing energy, green energy. It's put back into another form of productive use that generates jobs, taxes, benefits to the community.
One thing we know about renewable energy projects is they do demand a lot of land. They take a lot of space. You have to ask the question, well, where can we put these projects?
In the coalfield region, there's about 100,000 acres that's been impacted from mining. Of that 100,000 acres, there's thousands of acres that could potentially have solar on it. Would be better built on a lot of these mine sites than some prime farmland or some areas that maybe don't want solar in their community.
We're going to put the miners back to work. We're going to put the miners back to work.
I can tell you, the coal market in West Virginia has never been hotter. They cannot produce enough coal for the demand in the world.
Is all of this worth effectively sanctioning our own economy and handing our energy sovereignty to China?
We're not going to discount coal. We do still feel that coal has its place, but we also understand that there is a tremendous need for clean energy, and we want to be a leader in that industry also. Wise County has always traditionally been a coal-producing area. That's really the reason why the county exists. And that history goes back really to the early 1900s when coal was really booming. Of course, over the last several years, we've seen a drastic decline in coal production in all of Southwest Virginia, and that's had a major impact on our tax base.
In Virginia, the peak coal production was in 1990, but there's been a downturn in the amount of mining due to the economic changes, climate change, and some emphasis on long-term environmental impacts from mining. Right now in Virginia, we're seeing, metallurgical coal is still really strong, coal for production of steel. But a lot of the coal operations, either they've mined all the coal they're going to mine, or it's not economically feasible to get to. And so planning for when the mining's done to promote economic development is something we're wanting to do.
In all industries, thinking has to change. We build off of the past and we use that, but we have to look toward the future. And I think what's happened is people have seen change. They've seen how you can change. They have seen that we need to be very much on the cutting edge of technology. When you take a coal miner underground these days, he's not under there with a pick and shovel. He's under there with a very large piece of equipment that is high-tech as it can be, and he's running a computer most of the time. So that's what we're talking about. Men and women who are very well trained.
Coal miners are traditionally a very hardworking, very technically oriented, skilled trade. And so we feel like that there could be some transition opportunities between coal mining and renewable energy. We understand that job creation and from a long-term perspective may not be that great with solar installations, but we also do know that on the front end of these types of projects, there's going to be construction needs, there's going to be engineering needs.
It's a very ambitious program to transition to clean energy resources. It's not something that can be done overnight. I think everyone understands that climate change is real. The transition will take some time. The projects take many years to develop. So we need to move now and need to move quickly if we want to meet our net zero targets.
There are about 250,000 Americans working in solar today. To achieve a decarbonized electric grid by 2035, which is President Biden's goal, that would add another 1 million jobs to the solar economy.
And we'll lean on local workers to help build those. So it's an opportunity for those coal miners to continue to participate in energy production, but just in a different way.
You know, these solar projects that we are pursuing on Cumberland Forest are among the first solar projects in the region. So obviously we're at the start. We hope that these can help serve as a model for not just Southwest Virginia, but the wider Central Appalachian region in terms of how to do solar right in the coal fields.
We're very proud to be an energy producing community. This is helping us to reimagine how we produce energy. So we're still able to say we're keeping the lights on somewhere.
All right, hope y'all enjoyed that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get into my presentation, which builds on some of what you saw in the video. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing my presentation screen.
Actually, Brad, would you be able to launch the slides fully? We see the presenter view.
Okay. Let's see. Not sure what I need to do to
Go up to the top to display settings.
Okay.
Top, yep, click down, swap presenter view, up, there you go.
Okay, how's that?
You're in.
Okay, great. So really excited to talk to everybody today about our Cumberland Forest project and the work that we're doing to try to repurpose some former mine lands in the coal fields of Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee into solar projects. This is a picture of the former Red Onion surface mine site in Wise County. And this is one of the sites that we are looking at as potentially being an opportunity to repurpose for solar energy. And so what I'm going to do today is tell you a little bit broadly about the Cumberland Forest project so you understand the context for the solar work. And then I'll walk you through, how we've been approaching solar on mine lands, why we're doing it, the opportunities we see, some of the challenges we're trying to overcome, and what we're learning from what I said in the video is these are some of the first solar projects in the region. So incredible learning going on through these projects. But to get started, the Cumberland Forest itself is a 253,000 acre land acquisition that the Nature Conservancy arranged in 2019. We actually created the Cumberland Forest Limited Partnership as a private limited partnership to acquire these lands, and the Nature Conservancy serves as the manager for these properties. And there's two properties that are in the Cumberland Forest project. The orange property on the right is the Highlands property in Virginia, and then the red property in the sort of center left is the Attaya property, which is at Cumberland Gap and straddles Kentucky and Tennessee. And we purchased these lands because they provide key connections to larger blocks of conserved lands in the Appalachians. And so this is part of an effort to conserve and connect larger connected areas of resilient forests in the Appalachian Mountains. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that, and then we'll get into the specifics of the solar project. This just gives you a sense of the location of the Cumberland Forest in the context of North American biodiversity hotspots. So the confluence of Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee is an area of some of the highest biodiversity concentrations in the US. And in acquiring these 250,000 acres, which is an area larger than Shenandoah National Park and Acadia National Park combined, we are really trying to first and foremost seek to develop strategies to conserve biodiversity on these large forested areas. The Cumberland Forest is also situated within a really important climate corridor. The Nature Conservancy has identified the entire Appalachian mountain chain from Alabama to Canada as being one of potentially the most resilient landscapes on Earth in terms of being able to adapt to a changing climate and supporting plants and animals and people as we adapt to a changing climate. And so the Cumberland Forest is situated right in the heart of this key climate corridor that we're working to conserve across all of these different states in the eastern US. And we have developed a vision for conserving and maintaining connections and maintaining a healthy, resilient, and connected Appalachian forested corridor across all those states. And it's really one of the top priorities of the Nature Conservancy. The Appalachians has been elevated to being one of 4 global priorities for the Nature Conservancy to demonstrate innovative work around biodiversity conservation and addressing the threats of climate change. And the big vision for us in the Appalachians is to do great conservation work ourselves and with partners to maintain and enhance a connected corridor of forests from south to north to sequester carbon and to create a stage for nature to adapt to climate as it changes in the future. And what I want you to understand is that a key part of that continental vision we have for conservation pushes us to think about innovative ways to conserve large areas that are currently not protected or under conservation management in the heart of the Appalachians, which is the coalfields region in Kentucky, West Virginia, Southwest Virginia, and Tennessee. And here we still have large, extensive areas of forest, but a fairly low representation of conserved lands. And so the Cumberland Forest Project is a very ambitious effort by the Nature Conservancy to acquire 250,000 acres in the coalfields and begin to build a new model to conservation that reflects the realities of the coalfields region. And so as we're advancing the Cumberland Forest Project, it's not just a nature conservation project. It's a project where we are really working hard to manage these lands in a way that provides benefits for nature, but also supports local economies and the economic transition that is going on in the coalfields with the decline of coal and the need for new economic diversification, as well as community benefits and thinking about how we connect with the needs of people locally and support communities as they seek a new future in light of the fact that their economies are changing rapidly around them. And that's the context with which the solar work really fits in. So the Cumberland Forest Project has a lot of different components to it. There's forest management, there's recreation development, there's solar, there's reclaiming mine lands, there's a community fund. It's a very rich project with a lot of different pieces. But at the end of the day, everything we do on Cumberland Forest, we hope will be good for nature and good for people. So I'm going to transition into the solar development dimension of Cumberland Forest for the rest of the talk. This is a picture of Cumberland Forest looking from Cumberland Gap south. And what I want to stress with this picture is that the majority of the Cumberland Forest property is forested. And that's why we purchased the lands. And that's our primary goal, is to maintain those forests as forests for all the benefits that they provide to nature and people. Because these properties are in the heart of the Central Appalachian coalfields and they have a long history of intensive natural resource management, including coal mining, we have within these large forested properties areas that are former surface coal mines that are in a non-forested condition, such as the picture you see in the foreground here. So the surrounding Cumberland Forest property you see in the background, but this foreground picture of a former surface mine is also part of the property. And we've mapped about 10 to 12,000 acres, maybe about 4 to 5% of the property is in this non-forested, former mine land condition. And so thinking about ways we can manage these former mine lands within the property for nature and people benefits is really a key part of our project. And so solar on some of these sites, we think, is a great way to, on the nature side, create renewable energy, and on the people side, bring new tax revenues to the localities, bring some new jobs during the construction phase, and find ways to reinvest and repurpose these sites for new economic opportunity. Now, not all of those 10,000 acres of non-forested mine lands are going to end up being solar projects. I'll talk about some of the characteristics of a site that works well for solar. But on some of these lands, we're also thinking about reforestation to reconnect larger forest blocks. And in some areas, we're managing for other types of wildlife like elk and other early successional bird species. So not all of these former mine sites will become solar projects, but where we have the right set of conditions, we are really excited about pursuing solar to demonstrate a really productive reuse of these sites. So I want to walk you through how we began to approach this. As I mentioned, we acquired these properties in 2019. I'm going to focus mostly on the Virginia property now, just as an example for how we're looking at solar. But when we made the decision to try to explore the idea of bringing solar investment to some of these former mineland sites, the first place we got started was reaching out to our friends and colleagues at the Virginia Department of Energy to get some help looking at ways we could map our properties to develop an understanding of places that had potential for solar development. And so the map you see on the left is the Highlands property, 153,000 acres, and the orange areas represented places that we started to light up and map as being potentially compatible with solar because they had existing utility infrastructure from the former mining activities. They were relatively flat. We had good access. They weren't permitted for any mining activities. They kind of checked a lot of different boxes for us in terms of being potential solar sites. We took that information and then we used our own science and Nature Conservancy filters around ecological values, the forested lands, which we have committed to forest carbon projects and which we don't want to convert to non-forest. So we mapped out and sort of blocked out all the forest lands, all of the other important wildlife habitats, and other things that we didn't want to see used for solar, just based on our other management objectives. And we created a map that sort of highlighted these green and yellow areas as potentially available for solar in the sense that they wouldn't conflict with some of our other management goals for the property in terms of nature and people benefits. And so we did all that work and we realized that we had reached a point where we needed to, as a landowner, we needed to go out and reach out to the development community and begin to find solar developers to take a look at the property and help us understand where we had potential. And so we went through a competitive process and solicited proposals from a variety of solar companies who we invited to come to the property, and we showed them our maps and we showed them where we were interested in solar and where we were not going to do solar because we didn't want to convert forests or other important habitat areas on the property. And we gave them that canvas and we let the companies explore ideas and develop proposals for us. And we asked companies to help us understand the financial terms of a relationship with a solar developer, and if we built solar projects on the property, how they would approach environmental management considerations. And also one thing that was extremely important to us was understanding developers' perspective on community benefits. Again, this whole Cumberland Forest project is part of an effort to support a transition in the coal fields and to support new economic diversification that's compatible with nature conservation. And so finding developers that really wanted to use these projects to bring value to local people in the Appalachians was another big filter that we used. So after going through a big process, we were really excited to land with two partnerships, two collaborations, one with Sun Tribe, who you heard from Danny Van Cleef on the video. He's the CEO of Sun Tribe. They're based in Charlottesville, Virginia, and they have a partnership with Sol Systems. So that's one arrangement. And then Dominion Energy is one of Virginia's largest public utilities, who's also constructing solar projects and is mandated through the Virginia Clean Economy Act to develop a substantial amount of solar in the next decade. So we landed on two collaborations, Sun Tribe and Sol Systems and Dominion. Collectively, we have 7 sites on the property that are now under option with these companies to be developed for solar. If they're all built out, it'll generate about 125 megawatts of solar energy. We announced these collaborations last year, so we're very early into this work. And solar projects go through a multi-year pre-development period before they get to the construction phase. So our sites don't have solar panels on them as of yet. The companies are working on a variety of site assessments, looking at the mine sites, looking at their geotechnical characteristics, their compatibility with their solar infrastructure and hardware. They're developing their designs for where the arrays will go and how they'll be designed to avoid sensitive wetland areas or other unique features on these sites. There's a lot of work that the companies have to do with third-party mineral owners that's very characteristic of the coal fields. You have surface estate owners and mineral owners We are a surface estate owner, and so we're working with the mineral interests to get their support for the projects. There are other neighboring landowners that we hope will be part of this project, again, bringing more opportunity to local people. There will be siting agreements locally with the counties, all the way up to the state level permitting. And then a big piece of the pre-development work deals with the utility interconnection studies and the power offtake agreements that have to be developed. So that's a lot of work. I've learned a tremendous amount about solar development through this process, but our companies are doing an excellent job in moving through that process. But all that being said, we're still 3 to 4 years out from construction under the best scenarios. Some of you may have read, in the news, there's also some challenges with permitting at the regional scale with the regional grid, some backlog issues because there's so many solar projects coming online. So there are some headwinds in terms of timing, but we are, working with our developers and letting them move through this process and learning on every step of the way. One important thing I want to mention, in addition to going to construction, is when we go to construction on these projects, our developers are also committed to working with us and local communities on a community benefits plan that will actually have a budget and lead to specific investments in community needs related to workforce training or other capital improvement projects that are important to local people. That process will happen in the later stages of pre-development when the companies are ready to go to construction. But we really wanted to try to distinguish these projects on the community benefit side by having specific agreements with these companies that call for them to make investments in local communities that go above and beyond what they would normally do just through the regulatory process. So we're really excited about that. Once these are built, they'll operate for 35 to 40 years. And again, will generate clean energy and positive tax revenues in these localities and represent a new source of income in the coal fields, and also help the region begin to open up a new chapter as an energy producer in terms of being a place where we can develop renewable projects. This is just a picture of one of the sites, former surface mine. It's flattened because of the mining history. And this is kind of what all of our sites look like to some degree. This doesn't show an actual utility line, but there are nearby substations that make this site attractive for interconnection. And again, we are really keying in on the development of the non-forested lands, not developing the forested lands, and really trying to demonstrate smart siting in terms of keying in on non-forested lands for development. This is just a map that shows how our sites really line up with those green go solar areas that I showed you earlier. Some of the lease boundaries are broader, but the actual solar development panels and infrastructure will go in those green areas and some of those yellow areas, which we've identified as being compatible with our other management goals and protective of our forests. So again, we really hope to demonstrate smart siting through these projects. And this is all very much proof of concept. These are among the first solar projects in the region. There are some other projects moving forward as well, but this is part of the first generation of solar projects in Central Appalachia. So we're really excited about being on that front end of that learning curve and just trying to use these projects as a way to learn best practices and the best approach to repurposing former mine lands into new renewable energy projects. One of the powers of the Nature Conservancy is our ability to work locally, but scale our work to state and national and even global scales in terms of its impact. And one way we're trying to do that with these projects is that our work here in the Cumberland Forest is also part of a much broader effort that the Nature Conservancy has underway called Mining the Sun, which is a multi-state effort that the Conservancy is leading across the country to try to highlight the opportunity of repurposing former mine lands, whether it's coal mining lands in the east or hard rock mining sites in the west, for renewable energy and bringing new investment to energy producing communities that are going through a transition and still want to be energy producing communities, but are looking for new opportunities in the renewable space. While we also are able to demonstrate smart siting and the ability to repurpose disturbed lands for renewables and take some of the pressure off the conversion of forests or other important natural lands for renewables. We really want to try to show that we can reuse disturbed sites as we expand the renewable energy economy across the country. And a little closer to home in Virginia, the work in the coal fields is also connected to our broader efforts across Virginia to really advocate for the reuse of degraded lands, whether they're brownfields or mine sites, for renewable projects. Judy and others are doing great work at the state level to try to articulate that if we're smart, there are ways that we can develop renewables and take the space we need for that, but not compromise our priority conservation lands, our critical forested areas and wetlands and wildlife habitats and some of our prime farmland soils as well. So we really think there's an opportunity to be smart and to site projects in a way that is thoughtful. We're also working on strategies to develop some mitigation approaches when there are impacts to larger areas of forest, how to mitigate those impacts effectively, because we don't want to lose the important values of our forest lands as we transition to renewable energy. We want to try to find a balance between expanding renewables, but doing it smart so that we retain the important values that our forests provide for us. So a lot of exciting things about this project, a lot of learning, and it's going to be exciting to report over the next several years on how we're doing and how we're going. So really, I'll just stop there. I hope that was a helpful overview, and really happy to answer questions that come up from the group. So I'm going to stop sharing and hand it back over to Judy.
Brad, we're still seeing your screen, just so you know. And when it's a good thing that you're happy to answer some questions, because we got a whole bunch of them coming in. You generated a lot of great conversation among our audience. So let's get started. The first question is kind of an interesting one to me. It's about the trade-off in power generation between developing the site for solar and developing the site for wind. And I recall that when we put out the RFP for solar on this site, that at least one of the developers, I think, was interested in wind, and we didn't decide to go with that. Can you reflect a little bit on that decision?
Yeah, absolutely. So what's interesting is that there's not a one-to-one overlap between the wind resource and the solar resource. There are certain areas that are attractive for wind development, and then there are other areas that are attractive for solar. What we see in Southwest Virginia generally is that we think we have a better opportunity on the solar front with the former mine land sites. Our topography and elevation doesn't lend itself to really the most competitive wind resources that you might find off the coast of Virginia or in some of the higher mountain ridges in the other parts of the mountains. So generally, we think solar is a better play for us in Southwest Virginia and in the coal fields. We did get some interest from a wind developer who saw an opportunity on our property along what we call the sort of the Cumberland front. But for us, that area that they identified was all part of is all forested. And so for us, the conservation of those forests and those values of, recreation, clean water, clean air, carbon sequestration, forest products, that, those are for us a higher importance in our management goals for the project. So we decided not to pursue the wind project in favor of siting these solar projects on these disturbed sites.
Great. Thanks for sharing that with folks.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of questions kind of around the land, the use of the land as it's being reclaimed from a mine land and converting it to solar. One question is it better for greenhouse gas emissions if we cover the mines with solar or repurpose it to nature? And then there's a couple of questions about whether we'll be able to incorporate sort of bird and pollinator plantings on the site. Tell us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, those are great questions. So, something I mentioned early on. On Cumberland Forest, 250,000 acre property, maybe 10 to 12,000 acres of this non-forested former mine land. Not all of that will be good for solar, nor do we really want to put solar on all of those acres. We're trying to find the right sites for solar, but we also are really interested in really two other options: reforesting some of those former sites to create larger blocks of forest that we can reconnect, and then also managing some of those areas as more productive grassland sites that can support elk and other species that we care about. I have not seen, it may have been done, but I have not seen an evaluation of, what's sort of the carbon climate equation if we reforest a site versus put solar energy on a site, or a really productive grassland. That's a really interesting question. I just don't know the answer to that. I think all three would provide climate benefits, but it's a great observation. Something we should look into and consider. Judy, what was the other? Oh, the other part was about the pollinators. Great question as well. That's part of the design process that we're looking at right now. So it gets to the question of the solar companies are going to have to manage the vegetation on these sites once the solar panels are in place. They can't let it grow up because it'll interfere with the solar panels. So there's different ideas about how you can manage vegetation. And what we're pushing the companies to think about are nature-friendly approaches. And one of those may be, managing for pollinator plants. There's also some ideas around regenerative grazing, using sheep. So those are open questions that we're exploring. But we want to try to find a way to manage the vegetation on these sites that is compatible with nature and wildlife.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. So there's a couple questions around impervious cover, which, I know is something as a person in charge of conservation of a river system. I know you think about that a lot, but there's some statewide policy recently around in Virginia around solar energy and its degree of imperviousness. But some of our audience members are asking about if there are unintended consequences at this site from covering such vast amounts of land with impermeable solar panels. And again, asking question like maybe it might be better to rewild some of these lands. Could you talk a little bit about kind of the current condition of the sites and reclaimed coal mines and impervious cover?
Sure. Yeah. So all these sites are former mine lands. One of the characteristics of a lot of former surface mines is that they're pretty compacted by virtue of the way they were reclaimed originally. Of course, when they were coal sites, they had extensive, sort of stormwater management, in place. But as they were reclaimed and released from as a coal site, they were, the drainage was created that was done in a way that was satisfactory and handled the drainage on the site. So right now they're basically sort of flat grasslands that have a lot of non-native species from the reclamation, and sometimes are being invaded by invasive shrubs like autumn olive and other things. I'm not really exactly sure the impermeability of those sites now, and I know there's a lot of questions about the stormwater regulations in Virginia and how solar projects are going to be affected by that. I know at the end of the day that the companies are going to have to manage stormwater effectively under their permit. And I think there's a lot of discussion happening between the solar development community and the Department of Environmental Quality about what that should look like. So, we're going to try to be a positive advocate, obviously, for good practices. We want to see that as a landowner and as the Nature Conservancy. A lot of that interplay will happen between the developer and the permitting agency, in terms of how they develop their designs for water management. But we're certainly going to advocate for the best practices that will make sure that there's not an issue with drainage off the sites. Am I answering that question? Does that make sense?
Sure, I think so. You didn't explicitly say this, but we know that if you convert a forest land to solar panels, you've made a big change in how impervious that site is. But maybe a mine land I think as a mine land to a solar facility, you're not making a big change, and you might actually have some funding to improve the existing condition. Is that fair?
Yeah, and that's a good point, Judy. Because we're targeting these non-forested sites, we're not converting forest to non-forest, and that does have that is meaningful from the hydrologic standpoint. That's a really good point.
Definitely. Here's another question that slightly relates to water, but it's about acid mine drainage. And the questioner asks or says that they've read about acid mine drainage containing valuable minerals, including cobalt, which are important for batteries and naturally limited in the US. Any thoughts in the coalfield region in general about the possibility of maybe recapturing some of these rare earth minerals from old mine sites?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, an interesting topic. Acid mine drainage in general, just for people that may not be familiar with that, is in some areas where you've had coal mining, you have certain rock strata that when it is disturbed for mining and interacts with air and water, it can end up creating an acidified condition that leads to the leaching of minerals into the streams. That's not a good thing for water quality. Virginia is fortunate to not have a lot of that. There are a few coal seams in Virginia that have that challenge. It's much more prevalent in northern West Virginia, Pennsylvania, but it is a real problem, and there are ways that it's dealt with. The question of the rare earth minerals has been my understanding is the focus has not necessarily been on the acid mine drainage, but on some of the coal, what we call coal refuse, which is material that was produced through the mining or processing of coal. And so what you have in the coal fields is a couple different examples of that. One is we have what we call gob piles or waste coal piles, which were piles of coal refuse, mix of unused coal and rock that were generated and left behind before there were mining laws that were passed in the 70s. So you used to just mine coal and walk away when you were done until we passed laws to not allow that. But there is this legacy in the coal fields of these former waste coal piles that are out there. And many of those we're trying to get cleaned up. But there is a question has been raised, is there a potential to recover critical minerals from some of those coal refuse piles? There's some ongoing research about that now. So I don't think we really know the definitive answer, but there are some Department of Energy research getting started to really look at that question of reprocessing some of this historic waste coal for rare earth minerals. So that'll be a very interesting thing to watch in the next few years.
Brad, there's an interesting question about how we're paying for all of this. So can you explain how this work is getting funded?
In terms of the solar projects? Yeah, sure. So the thing to remember about the solar projects is that in this case, the Nature Conservancy is the land manager. So the Cumberland Forest Limited Partnership owns the Cumberland Forest property. We are the managing partner for that. So essentially we're the landlord. The solar development companies are working with us and will lease these sites from us to develop the projects and sell the power. So we essentially as a landowner will receive rent for providing these sites. The entirety of the business investment beyond that, the building of the project, the permitting, finding the power purchaser, all of that is entirely within the realm of the solar developers. So they are the ones driving the projects, paying us rent. And then also because we have unique agreements with them, also committed to a community benefits package that they will invest in local communities. So we're creating value for the Cumberland Forest as a landowner. We're creating value for the local communities through the projects, the tax revenues, and the community benefits plan. And then the solar developers, if they're successful, are creating value through their development of the projects and the sale of the power.
So we're really, our part of the partnership is that we have the land and the vision for how this entire 250,000 acres is going to be managed to meet all these different needs. And part of that, we need an income stream, right. to make that all possible. So that's our part of the partnership. And then the solar companies, they're delivering all the technical knowledge and really the business risk for trying out this approach.
Correct. And, to that point, one of the things that we are really learning and trying to learn through these projects is If we want to promote mine lands and brownfields and previously disturbed areas as sites for renewable energy to take the pressure off the conversion of green fields, if you will, it may be that some of these sites are more expensive to develop because of the past uses. And so as we learn that, we want to try to inform policy. And one of the ways we're doing that is, in Virginia, we've been supportive of a new program that Delegate Terry Kilgore helped advance, which is the Virginia Minelands and Brownfields Grant Fund, which is a new program that's been set up. We're trying to find funding for it, but that would support these types of projects if they ran into sort of above and beyond business as usual costs by virtue of being a previously disturbed land versus a greenfield site. And so one of the many learning pieces of this is, what are some of the hurdles or challenges to repurposing disturbed lands? How do we overcome those? Is there a way that grant programs or tax credits or those types of policy mechanisms can be helpful? And again, I think that shows the power of the Conservancy's ability to work on the ground with projects, but also connect that to our policy work and to try to have larger impacts, not just on the sites we're working in, but more broadly in this energy landscape.
Brad, we have a question about our interactions with the political decision makers on the plans, and I assume that means the folks communities that live around the Cumberland Forest area. Could you talk a little bit about how we are working with them and if there's anything kind of cooking in the short term?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when we announced these projects, we even before we announced these projects, we engaged the localities where they were sited so that they knew that these were coming online. And the support, and one of the speakers in the video was Brian Fallon, who's with Wise County Industrial Development Authority. Great guy, great local partner. But the support from the localities has been really strong. People are really excited about the repurposing of these former mine sites and the new opportunities they're going to create for Southwest Virginia. Our local legislators, state legislators, and federal legislators are also extremely excited and supportive of this work as a way to reinvest in Central Appalachia. So that's been really strong, Judy. As we go forward, the creation of the community benefits plan will engage localities and local stakeholders as well. It's a new process for us that we're gonna develop as we go. But the idea will be that as our developers get a little closer to construction and have the certainty that they're green light towards a full built on a project, we will engage in a stakeholder process to get input from local people around the kinds of things that matter to them and how these development projects could invest in local interests that can be beneficial, like job training or other types of projects. So that's another element of what we're trying to do.
I love the partnerships that we have locally. That's just such an exciting thing. And, Brad, you and I have been colleagues for a long time, and I work in Charlottesville at the statewide level, and you have worked in the landscapes. And I just think it's an incredible opportunity to be able to build deep relationships, over decades with communities and really be neighbors and really be working towards a common interest. So that's just my little note to you, Brad. Cheer for you. Couple of questions around you mentioned the Mining the Sun initiative at the end. So there's a couple questions around other thoughts about other places we might be where we might be looking at solar development. There's one question about what is a brownfield. So maybe that's a small one to tackle, but then can solar be done in old garbage dump sites, or also some questions about what are all those mined lands that showed up on that map in the rest of Virginia. Care to tackle that bundle?
Yeah. So maybe I'll speak to Mining the Sun a little bit first, and then maybe grab a couple of those other things. So I mentioned the Nature Conservancy has this larger national effort called Mining the Sun. It involves 8 or 9 states. West Virginia is also a state that's involved. I think Ohio, some Western states. So we are more broadly, we've identified that if we're going to meet the goals of really aggressively growing renewable energy and building out renewable energy facilities across the country, it's going to take a lot of land. And so wherever we can repurpose previously disturbed lands, we want to try to do that and be an advocate for that. So mining the sun is really about trying to unlock the potential of former mine lands or brownfields. Brownfields can be just old industrial sites. It just means a previously disturbed, previously used area that you're trying to repurpose, rather than a green field, which is, say, just like a pristine swath of forest or a farmland or something like that. So when we look across, just thinking about West Virginia as an example, when we look across the line in West Virginia, we see thousands of acres of former surface mines in West Virginia that we would love to see used for solar, at least some of them. And so if we can show success in Virginia, and if we can show success on other parts of Cumberland Forest in Tennessee and Kentucky, we hope that stimulates excitement and strategies for building projects in those states and West Virginia. So it's kind of a, build a momentum around it. One thing that was really interesting when we went out to bid for the projects on Cumberland Forest, we wanted to see projects in all 3 states. That's our goal. But because of the Virginia Clean Economy Act, there was really laser interest from developers in Virginia, in the Virginia part of Cumberland Forest. And that was a really interesting learning lesson for us to understand how policy drives behavior within the private sector. And so we want to see similar policies and signals from West Virginia and Kentucky and Tennessee around renewable energy to help drive the business sector towards those states. Right now, Virginia has a much more enabling policy climate around renewables in those other states, and that was reflected in what we saw when we put our property out onto the market.
Okay. All right. So many great questions. So little time. I'm gonna try to squeeze in 2 more questions, Brad. Might be tough. So one of them is a bunch of questions kind of around the ecological impact of developing with solar panels and the environmental sustainability of the panels themselves. And you and I were just talking with our colleagues in Kentucky recently about a study working with to look at the way that wildlife might be affected by the construction of these facilities. And a colleague of ours, Dr. Liz Cayley's in North Carolina, has actually extensively studied that issue and has some learning that she's done around how to minimize impacts to wildlife from solar energy development, and is actually working on a DOE grant, which if she gets that, Cumberland Forest would be one of the sites where we get to do that. So that's a nice thing, right, about having this on our property, is that we can be a place where these studies can occur and we can learn as we go. Curious to know, Brad, in your conversations with our developer colleagues, if there's been any conversations about in decommissioning, what will be the fate of the equipment on this site, or have we just not gotten to that part yet? Tell us where we are.
Yeah, that's a great question. No, I don't have a lot to report on that. I think that's something we need to keep our eye on. I know as a landowner, when we were negotiating our agreements with the developers, we made sure that we had certainty that when the projects were done, that they would be reclaimed, that the equipment would be removed, the site would be restored to its pre-project condition. So as a landowner, I think that's an important lesson learned that we would encourage other landowners considering solar to make sure they have in their agreements, is a commitment to decommission the site. I know there's a lot of discussion around recycling opportunities or disposal issues or how to deal with that. The panels, I don't really know a whole lot about that, but that's clearly going to be an important part of the life cycle consideration of these projects, and something that we're going to need to keep our eyes on.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that our audience members have brought to us, and just we don't have this all figured out, right? This is a new venture for us, and honestly for the world, to try to shift to decarbonize our entire electric sector. So I think this is a good point, and we'll try to keep working to make sure that we do that right. Brad, last question for you is kind of around the future of Cumberland Forest. So the specific question, the questioner wants to know, there's the properties are kind of disjointed. Is there plans for sort of infill around some of those? So maybe you could answer that, and then just sort of where we're hoping to go with Cumberland Forest, and then we'll wrap up for the day.
Okay, yeah, well, this has been great. Great questions. And if we didn't get to some questions, we'll try to follow up. Cumberland Forest is a really exciting project. It's huge in its scope. As I mentioned today, we've talked about the solar on mine lands piece of Cumberland Forest, but it's a very ambitious project with a lot of different parts. As I said at the outset, the big picture goal is to try to demonstrate we can manage this 250,000 acres in ways that are good for nature and people. And we're doing that through sustainable forestry that, obviously supports healthy forests and carbon storage and wildlife and water quality, but also provides jobs and provides wood products into economies. We're working on outdoor recreation projects. We have a goal of creating permanent public access for recreation to as much of this property as we can. We recently announced a big win on that front in Tennessee, where we signed an agreement with the state to permanently secure 43,000 acres of the property for public recreational access. So after the Cumberland Forest Limited Partnership eventually sells this property, we're leaving behind permanent agreements that provide for public access as well as conservation protections. So the big picture here is that if we can do a great job with this first really big land acquisition in the coal fields and show that we can create a positive financial return, positive environmental outcomes, and positive benefits for people, we want to do more of these types of projects. We have a vision for conserving connected forests from Alabama to Canada, and there are other very large forested properties in the coal fields that need conservation management. But these properties are so big that our philanthropic-based model, we can't do it with that. We've got to try new models, and this impact investment model, creating a limited partnership and being a for-profit entity is something we're testing, but we think it could unlock the potential to invest in nature at a very large scale in the Central Appalachians. And that's going to be key if we're going to achieve this grand vision and ambition of holding the Appalachians together in the face of a changing climate and in support of people and their needs.
Brad, thanks for all of that. Thanks for the amazing work you do. Thanks for the time that you've spent with us today. It's always a privilege. It's always a good day when I get to spend an hour talking about big ideas with you. So thank you so much. I'm afraid we're at the end of our time today. So I really want to thank the audience who tuned in for your support of the Nature Conservancy, because it makes all of this work possible. We'll be sending everyone a follow-up email over the coming days with links to the resources we talked about, recording, and questions that we didn't get to, answers to questions we didn't get to today. If you're enjoying these webinars, please share them with your friends. Invite them along, share a recording. It would be great to have an even bigger crowd. Join us for our next webinar next Thursday, June 16th at noon. We'll be chatting about the Nature Conservancy's work in the grasslands of northern Tanzania, the home of the Serengeti Ngorongoro crater and the Maasai people. Alphonse Malia, TNC's Northern Tanzania program lead, will talk about how people and wildlife coexist in these grasslands and the growing threats from invasive species of plants and the overgrazing of livestock. You won't want to miss it. So sign up today at nature.org/MA webinars. Thank you again for joining, and we hope you have a wonderful afternoon.